plane, the F-15 Eagle, was built for one purpose and one purpose only: total air superiority. It was created to combat the threat posed by the Soviet MiG fighters during the height of the Cold War in the 70s, and was the first strike plane that could detect and kill from many miles away, as well as engage in dogfights. It's still in operation today, and in 30 years of active service, it has never been beaten in air-to-air combat. It's the benchmark by which all modern strike planes are judged. The F-15 saw active service in both Gulf Wars and is now keeping the peace, patrolling the skies above the west coast of America.
Pretty incredible airplane, actually. Thinking about its design was in the late 50s, 60s. Came off the production line in the mid-70s. So it's been around for quite some time.
The F-15 comes in 4 versions, including a bomber.
It's a pretty big airplane. It was actually built to house the radar that lives in the nose. The airplane is about 43 feet tall, about 63, 64 feet long, and at the tail it's just under 20 feet high. So it's a pretty large airplane. It's been akin to the size of a tennis court.
It requires a 2.5 kilometre long runway. And this means that it can't operate from small airfields close to the battlefield. This problem was cracked by the British when they came up with the Harrier jump jet, a plane that needs no runway at all. It can do things that no other in-service jet plane can perform. It can take off vertically. It can take off with a short runway. It can even hover. Built originally in the 1960s, the Harrier jump jet revolutionized fighter plane design. Over 800 Harriers have been in service around the globe, taking off from land and sea.
The Harrier concept came about many, many years ago during the Cold War. Its design was to be able to take off from very short surfaces, to land vertically in case there were no runways to make use of. And we're talking about a concept that was in the 50s, and yet it's still going into the 21st century. What makes the Harrier special is the fact that it can land vertically. It can land on a ship, it can land in a clearing in a wood, which makes it very special.
The reason that the Harrier can perform these incredible manoeuvres is its extraordinary engine system. There are 2 air intakes, but only one powerful Rolls-Royce Pegasus engine.
And we can bring precision weapons, which is where warfare is, to the fight.
Like the F-15, the Harrier is getting old, and by modern standards requires a huge amount of pilot input just to keep the plane in the air when they should be concentrating on the enemy. Also, its inability to go supersonic could put it at a disadvantage when up against faster jets. The solution is the F-35, the Joint Strike Fighter, the only aircraft in the world that is both supersonic and capable of vertical takeoff and landing. The plane is still in development, but its designers firmly believe it represents the future of strike aircraft.
I'm Lieutenant Colonel Art.
The JSF achieved this extraordinary feat due to its unique engine system, which is based on the same principles as the Harrier. The engine has a large rear nozzle that can be directed both backwards and downwards. But it also incorporates a new piece of technology that the Harrier doesn't have: a massive fan just behind the pilot, powered by the engine.
The lift fan allows a tremendous amount of thrust to be harnessed out of the propulsion system and give the airplane a capability to do its vertical part of its work with a lot more payload than we've ever experienced in airplanes before.
The fan is activated when vents open up just behind the pilot. Air is sucked down and pushed out the bottom of the plane. So together with the rear nozzle, the aircraft is balanced on 2 pillars of thrust.
The rear nozzle, in addition to pointing straight down, can twist in yaw, which allows the airplane to pivot in the sky and perform 360-degree turns. The airplane can fly sideways, the airplane can fly backwards just by vectoring the rear nozzle.
And while in hover, the plane is controlled by onboard computers.
Unlike previous airplanes, for example in the Harrier, where the pilot has been responsible for controlling the thrust vector and making the inputs required to have the airplane do all those maneuvers, the JSF airplane, the pilot's just going to ask for go forward, go backwards, turn left, turn right, and the computers now are responsible for wiggling all the parts in the airplane necessary to achieve that maneuver.
The use of onboard computers to help fly a plane is now essential in all strike planes and has totally revolutionized the face of air combat. Computers are now used to fly planes that humans couldn't keep in the sky. The first plane to pioneer this use of onboard flight computers was the F-16 Fighting Falcon. In fact, it can't fly without them. The F-16s of 4th Fighter Squadron at Hill Air Force Base near Salt Lake City, Utah, are on standby, ready to deploy to a war zone at a moment's notice. The F-16 is an extremely agile plane, something it achieves with a revolutionary design concept. It has an airframe that is designed not to stay in the air. Traditional planes like the F-15 or civilian airliners have stable aerodynamic airframes that will naturally return to level, safe flight if left to their own devices. The F-16 uses an entirely different concept built into its design and manufacture. It has an aerodynamically unstable airframe that constantly wants to bank and spin, and that willingness to turn helps the plane to perform complex maneuvers. But of course, the more unstable the design, the less the plane wants to right itself and stay in the air. The only solution is to have a powerful onboard computer constantly correcting the inherent instability by moving the flaps, rudder and ailerons thousands of times a second in addition to the pilot's inputs. Without the computer, the F-16 would literally fall out of the sky.
From the pilot's perspective, it's very stable. From a aeronautics perspective, it's an unstable aircraft.
The only foolproof way to avoid being shot down while attacking deep behind enemy lines is to make sure no one can see you, to make yourself invisible. On the edge of the White Sands Desert in New Mexico is Holloman Air Force Base, the home of the most radical strike plane ever created, the stealth bomber, the F-117 Nighthawk. A plane so strange that when pilots saw the first one, they thought it was a joke. It's made look like an alien spaceship, but the F-117 is the logical step forward from the F-16, a strike bomber that is invisible to radar.
A major trait, get into those areas without being detected, tracked, and shot by the enemy.
The key to its success is its shape, angles and surfaces that do not reflect radar beams.
It was designed so that it could penetrate heavily defended airspace, and any enemy radar systems that might be looking for that aircraft will either be deflected away or will be absorbed by low observable RAM cover. Anytime you've got an edge, you have the potential for a radar to see that edge. So there's some really smart engineering that went into to make sure that those edges are all optimized and as flush as possible to ensure there's no radar cross-section bloom to the enemy radar systems.
Any irregular shapes, such as fuel tanks or weapons, are hidden inside the plane. And because the engines are baffled, the plane is almost silent to anyone on the ground.
Well, hopefully by the time the enemy would hear an F-117, the bombs have already gone off and we're well on our way home.
But even this amazing plane can't do it all. Like the Harrier, it can't go supersonic, and if seen by the naked eye, it is vulnerable to other fighters as it doesn't carry a gun. What was needed was a fast, stealthy strike plane, the FA-22 Raptor. In creating the FA-22, its US designers have gone for broke, building the first ever air-to-air fighter with a stealth capability. and it's the first stealthy plane to go supersonic. 2 decades of design and testing, and has incorporated the best features from all the strike planes currently in service.
The special thing about the Raptor is we've taken lessons learned. Stealth has been around a long time. With the FA-22, we call it 4th generation. We've taken all that lessons learned to not only be able to, from a shape or applications, to not be seen or to be seen very late by threat radars, but also be able to maintain that. So it's not just go for one mission. I need to be able to maintain that on the ramp for a persistent capability.
The F-117 had to be angular to be stealthy, but advances in stealth technology means the FA-22 Raptor can have familiar curved aerodynamic surfaces and still remain invisible to radar. The Raptor carries powerful electrical detection systems that can scan the airspace up to 1,200 kilometers around it. This ability to spot the enemy from such a large distance, combined with its invisibility, gives the FA-22 pilots an unbeatable advantage in combat. While the US has gone down the route of stealth with the FA-22, Britain and its European partners have gone for super manoeuvrability, creating their own advanced strike plane, the Eurofighter Typhoon. It can cruise at supersonic speeds, carry out complex manoeuvres at high G-forces, and has the most sophisticated pilot interface ever created. What sets the Eurofighter apart is that it can pull off these kinds of moves while flying supersonic.
When you aggressively manoeuvre this airplane, the roll rates that you generate are quite frankly startling. It really feels like you're on the outside of a washing machine being spun around. The roll rates will leave your head pinned to one side of the canopy if you're not careful. With airplanes capable of 9G, 9 times the force of gravity, this is a fairly tight term in anybody's language. 9G is sort of currently recognised to be sort of physiologically a limiting factor.
The F-15 and F-16 were also capable of pulling 9Gs, but only for short bursts. The Eurofighter is different. It can fly at 9Gs for extended periods. But in order to keep its pilots conscious, they must wear a specially designed Typhoon G-suit.
One of the drawbacks of all this agility and all this G is that it does weird things to your body. So through the years we've developed various G protection systems. But with Eurofighter being that much more of a high G airplane, we obviously have to give the pilot the best chance of not losing consciousness. So in addition to G trousers, we have inflatable boots in here. We connect the G-suit trouser connection here into the boot. That allows the air to be forced down into bladders that are in the boot. They inflate, squeeze my foot, and just further increase the coverage of this G protection device. A matching pair. Zipping up, slightly unique, going from top to bottom, so that the zip doesn't slip down under the forces of gravity. It's already down there, keeping me in there. Flying helmet, providing impact protection, crash helmet, providing communications. We'd take this airplane to places that without this equipment you just simply wouldn't survive.
This suit can keep the pilot alert and conscious while pulling 9G. That the F-35, Raptor and Eurofighter are the last strike planes ever to be flown by humans. The strike planes of the future may well be pilotless.